Hi, so here we go, part 3 of the defined benefit video series, and this one's going to be looking at compliance and some of the aspects and things to bear in mind when working on defined benefit schemes. So the first thing to mention is you've probably seen the recently announced changes from the FCA in the potential figures that they will use when looking at redress for clients. They've talked about updating the factors used for inflation amongst other things, and this could potentially have quite a substantial impact on redress to clients that the FCA think have been disadvantaged from a defined benefit transfer route. The impact of it's yet to be seen, and it's actually still under consultation, but it's definitely something to bear in mind. Worth keeping an eye on some of the FOS cases as well to see the kind of redress that is being applied in these instances. Another compliance issue to bear in mind, and something we touched on in a previous video, is regarding death benefits. As I mentioned, personally, I don't think getting a life quote really addresses the fact and the client's need as to why they don't want to lose the benefits under the scheme. But nonetheless, we're seeing some compliance firms insist that there is a life cover quote on file if we are ruling out taking protection out in place of losing death benefits under the scheme. The difficulty we're then seeing is, okay, so what is that cover based on? Is it just for a fixed term until the client reaches normal retirement age? Is it whole of life because they'd possibly have had those scheme benefits for whole of life? Is it based on the CETV now? Is it based on a future rate? It's a bit of a minefield. So again, it's something to decide as a firm. If you think that a client who wants to move partly because of death benefits should be ruling out taking out a separate piece of life cover, maybe decide as a firm what that cover should be and how it would best represent it, and then just ensure that consistency across all your advisors and across all cases. We see quite a lot of queries from compliance regarding the TVASs used compared to, and the age used in the TVASs compared to the client's retirement age. The anticipated retirement age compared to the scheme normal retirement age can make a huge difference in the TVAS. If the scheme normal retirement age is 65, but your client's likely to access their benefits much earlier, it's essential to get early retirement factors, vice versa if they're likely to retire later, and to get a really accurate TVAS. Just running a basic TVAS without PCLS commutation factors and without early or late retirement factors isn't compliant. It needs to be as personalised and as tailored to the client's circumstances as possible. Partial transfers. This is a interesting one. We've yet to see, I've seen one scheme that did allow some partial transfers, but for the most part they don't, they're just not there. I understand the stance of if a partial transfer is available, why not look into it, why not secure some of the retirement income, and then use the rest for flexibility. It's always worth asking the question. You never know, that might come up, and if you're doing the data gathering, it's worth asking anyway and noting on the file. But I've yet to see, other than the one, and that was more because it was two schemes in one, that you were able to partially transfer out. We've actually not seen any others where it's just a single scheme and you could remove some and keep some to retain some secure benefits. Compliance also want to see, in the same way if you did a normal pension switch case and you have to rule out other options, they're wanting to see the same with an occupational transfer. So rule out why you've not gone to the client's existing workplace pension, the usual rule out why not stakeholder pension, why not other personal pension providers. They're also wanting to see you rule out why you haven't transferred to a Section 32 in order to retain the GMPs, which I think is an interesting one. Firstly, I looked today, 8th of September 2017, and there's only 2 providers in the marketplace that have a Section 32 contract. I've asked both of those providers if they will allow existing GMP benefits to be transferred into a Section 32 contract and retain them, and neither of them have responded yet. A similar question was asked to advisors, I think it was about 5 years ago, and at the time none of them would accept GMP benefits. So if your compliance company is asking why you are not recommending transferring to Section 32, there's a good chance it's physically impossible, and even if it is, there's only 2 providers. They might not be on your list, they might not be a provider that you've got an agency with and that you're able to work with. The second thing to think about with the GMPs is the purpose of the GMP is obviously to guarantee a minimum income, and the income has to be provided from that plan, but not necessarily just from the protected rights elements that have formed GMPs. So if you've got quite a large CETV being offered and a small percentage of that is in relation to GMPs, and the plan's transferred, if the plan's held in a Section 32 contract and the value of the protected element isn't enough to pay the GMPs, then they'll just go to the non-protected element to pay the GMPs. So yes, it's a guarantee, but it's kind of almost just being paid by yourself. It's your own plan, and it's the client's cost to provide that GMP. So particularly when there's only a small element of GMPs in relation to a larger plan, I don't think it's a viable concern of compliance to be justifying why it's not going into a Section 32 contract. But it's certainly something to look into, to consider, and compliance firms are asking for it. So just make sure that you've looked into the option for your client and documented why that's not the recommended route. And lastly, we spoke to some PI insurers to see what their stance is on defined benefits and on firms that are getting involved in this market. What I was told is that the majority of the time they are factoring in to a firm that's got permissions to do pension transfers. They've already factored into the premium that will occur sometimes, that there will be some pension transfers happening. So that won't present a problem. What could present a problem would be if the activity and the amount of transfers seen is what the PI insurer considers above a normal level. Now, normal is up to them, how they define normal, what they would expect to see, and I'm sure it'll be something that comes up. But I have been told that firms who do an above normal level of work in occupational transfers might struggle to get renewal terms when they come to renew their PI. The reason for this is because in 1988, the ability to transfer out of occupational schemes happened, and the regulator at the time took 6 years to say exactly what their stance was on it and what they expected to see as good practice, and then they retrospectively applied that, which is remarkably unfair, to state the obvious. But it meant that a lot of advisors and a lot of insurers were quite heavily penalised at the time, and this is making PI insurers very, very nervous. We know the FCA have given some guidance, we know that they're looking into TVASs, and there is ongoing work in it. The worry is it'll take them another 2, 3, 4 years to decide exactly what their stance is, and then to look back and say, well, in 2017 you should have been doing this. So because of that, PI insurers are very wary. It's definitely something that will come up, if it hasn't already, then when renewal comes round, and it's something else to bear in mind. My recommendation would just be to show that you've got a full, complex, detailed process in place, that you've got the risk controls we talked about in the very first video, that you've got sense checks happening, that you are working with other advisors who also work in this area. The more you can do to document the processes, the way that you're approaching it, and how you can ensure that only the advice that's suitable for clients goes through in terms of defined benefits, the better chance you have of not seeing your PI premiums, which are already not the cheapest, rocketing through the roof. So hopefully that's helped, hopefully that's given some tips in this area, which is particularly tricky. We'll be turning some of these video content into guides that you can download as well from the website. But in the meantime, thank you for watching.